Hello everyone, welcome to StudyIQ. My name is Jay Kumar and today, along with Vignesh Karthikeya, let's have a look at the TSR Subramanian Committee report on education. Now TSR Subramanian, he is a former Cabinet Secretary of India and he has been appointed as to head this committee and give its suggestions. The report of this committee has been made public recently and is drawing a lot of attention, as you can all see. So this is also being considered as the backbone of the new education policy in India. So let's have a look at what it is. Now, before we go into the Subramanian Committee report, let's have a look at the timeline for some understanding of how education has evolved in India post-independence. So immediately after independence, there was the Radhakrishnan Commission. The Radhakrishnan Commission was short-lived and it came up with few recommendations, but it was successful in giving a basic framework for education in India. But the next major commission was the Kothari Commission. The Kothari Commission was appointed in 1964 and it submitted its report in 66. Though its main goal was to emphasize the role of people in national development, it also had many other objectives. Like it had to conduct a detailed study of the education system with a special emphasis on quality. Now, commissions before that, or even judgments before that, did not deal with quality aspect in education. All they concentrated post independence was how to incorporate the vast majority of Indian population and educate them. But Kothari Commission for the first time dealt with the quality issue, the quality of the textbooks, teaching material, or whatsoever it may be. Now, Kothari Commission gave certain goals to Indian government. Now, some of those goals recommended by Kothari Commission was to increase productivity, that is to include science as a basic component, and improve research in science and technology. That was the first one. Next, it also asked the central government to make laws regarding acceleration of modernization. Now, what does this mean? It means adopting new methods of technology, like building skills, inculcating values, and then universalizing education, making it accessible to everybody in India. It also said you have to promote social and national integration, and you have to inculcate national values and such. But Kothari Commission, the most unique feature of this commission is that this was a 17-member commission, but it also included 5 foreign national educationists, one each from the countries like UK, US, France, Japan, and Russia. Now let's move on to the 42nd Constitutional Amendment, which came out in 1976, almost 10 years after the Kothari Commission report. Now, as we all know, this came out during Indira Gandhi's era as a Prime Minister of India, and this was also called as the mini constitution. But when it comes to the realm of education, what this constitutional amendment did was it brought out a clause regarding the sharing of responsibility. Now, what does the sharing of responsibility mean? Now, as we all know, there are various subjects on which both the center and state makes laws. Now, there are 3 lists in the Constitution of India called the state list, center list, and the concurrent list. Now, education was originally, or at least before 1976, it was in the state list of subjects. But according to the 42nd Constitutional Amendment, education was transferred from state list to the concurrent list. Concurrent list is the list where both the center and the state makes laws, which gave the center also the power to make laws on education, starting from 1976. Now, moving on, 10 years after the 42nd Constitutional Amendment did this, there was the National Policy on Education. As we all can see, it has evolved into a national phenomenon now. In 1986, the National Policy on Education came out and it was considered as a paradigm shift in education because this was the first of its kind. There was no other national policy before this. Now, this is important because many of its salient features have been incorporated. Now, national policy on education was important because of various reasons. Firstly, it brought about a national system of education. This had similar modules and syllabus throughout the country. It also suggested education for equality. That means to ensure that no kid was deprived of education just because they are from a different social or economic background. It was the education for the purpose of equality was promoted throughout the country. Also, adult education was promoted, And as we all see, the standard versions of government schools called Navodaya Vidyalayas were set up. Also, there was the vocationalization aspect that was looked into, which was also looked into in Kothari Commission, but National Policy on Education went detailed in that matter. Vocationalization, as we all know, it means training of people in a particular skill. So that was promoted. And then one outstanding feature of National Policy on Education was that the status of the teacher was raised. As in, previous committees had not paid much attention, like it could be Kothari Commission or even the 42nd Constitution Amendment. It had not paid much attention to the status of the teacher. It was raised during the National Policy on Education. Now, in the second version of the timeline, let's look at how education evolved in the 21st century India. Here, we have to pay attention to the 86th Constitutional Amendment Act that came out in 2002. Now, this 86th Constitutional Amendment Act gave rise to right to education. What is right to education? Right to education was the clause that was added to the Chapter 3 of the Constitution. Now, Chapter 1, as we all know, is Union Territory, Chapter 2 is Citizenship, and Chapter 3 is Fundamental Rights. Now, to this chapter of Fundamental Rights, right to education was added according to the 86th Constitutional Amendment Act. So now, the right to education became a fundamental right. It was a fundamental right under Article 21A. So, one major implication of this amendment is that as a fundamental right, right to education became judicially enforceable by the courts, just like any other fundamental rights. Now, following this, Parliament also made a law which came to be called the Right to Education Act in 2009, the RTE 2009. Right to Education Act 2009 brought about key changes to the system of education in India. Now, let's look at those changes. Now, firstly, RTE, which was enacted in 2009, brought about the Free and Compulsory Education Clause, which provided free education to the age group of 6 to 14. 14 years, that is up to the 10th standard. And secondly, there was this clause of no detention until the completion of elementary education. Now, elementary education, as you all know, it includes education between Anganwadi levels to the 5th standard. Now, the pupils or children were not supposed to be demoted or failed during the completion of this elementary education. Now, that was the clause that was brought about to encourage children to attend schools and learn. Also, as another clause, there was a limit put on pupil-teacher ratio. Now, the pupil-teacher ratio was abnormally low, as in there was too many children and there were too few teachers. The RTE Act changed that and set a limited and a defined pupil-teacher ratio. This act was to apply to all of India except the state of Jammu and Kashmir. Okay, now let's move on to the new education policy in India. As we all can see from the above informative graph here, this is the scale in which the new education policy is planned to be implemented in India. That you can read it as so here, the number of villages, urban local bodies, and how many themes it is supposed to have, and all of the other information is given here. Now, regarding TSR Subramanian himself, he is a former cabinet secretary, as I mentioned earlier, and he is a 1961 batch IAS officer. He is from UP Cadre. So he submitted this report, which went public recently. Now let's have a look at the committee recommendations. So the TSR Subramanian committee report, it recommends 10 important goals for the Indian government that will revolutionize the system of education in India. Let's have a look at what those recommendations are. First, there is the Indian Education Service. The committee recommends that there should be an Indian Education Service that should be set up as an all India service. Now, just like we have IAS and IPS and IFS, as they are the 3 all India services, with the rest of the services and which comes under UPSC exam being the central services. There are only 3 all India services for now. You should remember that. That is IAS, IPS and IFS. Now, this committee also recommends that IES or the Indian Education Service should be set up as an all India service, and it should be responsible to the state governments, and the controlling authority should be the HRD ministry, obviously, which is the Human Resource Development Ministry. And then it also recommends that the budgetary allocation should increase phenomenally. It should increase very much, and it has even given the target of 6%. 6% of GDP should be the new budgetary allocation for just the purpose of education. Moving on, there's the clause of teacher eligibility. What does teacher eligibility deal with? For teachers to be recruited, now there are not much strict norms for primary school teachers or any other school teachers for government exams. Now this committee recommends that there should be eligibility condition of 50% marks at graduate level for teachers. To even enter into the Bachelor of Education courses or the B.Ed courses like we call them, the minimum eligibility condition should be 50% marks at graduate level. And then there should be regular teacher entrance tests or TETs, which should be compulsorily conducted for the recruitment of all teachers, irrespective of whether they are primary school teachers, Anganwadi teachers, or high school. There's also this system called as renewal system that is being making news when it comes to this committee recommendations. Now, what is this renewal system? There is this certification system for teachers in government and private schools. This has not been done for all the teachers. Now, this committee recommends that there should be certification for teachers in government and private schools, and it should be made mandatory. Now, as far as renewal is concerned, this certificate or so-called licensing that will be issued to the teachers in both government and private schools, it should be renewed every 10 years by an external invigilator or through external testing method. So this is the system of renewal system. Now moving on, there is also this important aspect of preschool education that has been looked into by the commission. Now regarding preschool education, the commission says that the children who are in the age group of 4 to 5 years, that is basically who are within 6 years, should also be given a fundamental right to education. As in now, under RTE only covers the children between the age group of 6 to 14, as we all know. But this committee recommends that preschool education is also as important, and then children within the age group of 4 to 5 years should also be declared as a right, and a program for it should be implemented as soon as possible. Yeah, so moving on, the committee also recommended that there should be the no detention policy, which is already existent under RTE, the Right to Education Act, which came out in 2009. We had a look at this earlier. Now this policy, the committee said it is flawless and it should continue to exist up to primary class, that is class 5. Now as we all know, no detention policy is the policy where the school does not fail a child even if performed poorly until the primary years of schooling. Now next, committee also recommends the system of introduction of the system of on-demand board exams. Now what does on-demand board exams actually mean? This means that the board exams, as we all know, board exams tend to put a lot of stress on the kids and their parents. So to reduce this, the committee recommends that there should be a method where the student himself or herself gets to choose the date for the examination under a limited perspective. Of course, he can't choose throughout the year. So for flexibility in the system of conduction of board exams, this system, the introduction of this system has been recommended by the commission. Moving on, there's the midday meals extension. Now we all know that midday meals, which is a major part of school education in India, it is being given up to primary and higher primary school, that is up to the classes 7th and 8th standard, but not to secondary schools. Secondary schools, as we all know, covers 9th and 10th standard. This midday meals system, the committee says it should be extended to the secondary school also, because this is being suggested considering the high levels of malnutrition and anemia among adolescent kids. Moving on, this is a very important suggestion that is being made by the committee, that is a new law for college education. Now we all know present college education law is being determined by the UGC Act, or the University Grants Commission Act of 1956. It's an age-old law. It's been 60 years since that law has been come into force, and since it is considered very backward, now that law should be allowed to lapse according to the commission, and a new law for the management of higher education should be brought about. And lastly, the committee also recommends regarding the system of education in India should incorporate foreign universities also. What does this mean? That means foreign universities, like top 200 foreign universities, is what the committee has in mind. It says that the top 200 foreign universities, they should be allowed to open their own branches and campuses in India, so that they can give out the degree which is of the same level as it is in their home country. That means if Oxford University opens a branch in Delhi, that means the degree that is being given in the branch at Delhi by Oxford University will have the same value as that of it being received in UK, so that lots of students do not migrate to foreign countries. This is a very good and open approach that the Commission has recommended. Now, this is the broad aspect of the committee recommendations. These are the 10 important recommendations you cannot forget. Now that we have a basic understanding of what the committee wants when it comes to education in India, let's move on and analyze what the committee, whether the committee is right, wrong, what part of it is right and what part of it is wrong. Here comes the analysis and critique by Vignesh Karthik.
Hi friends, let's look at the positives of the TSR Subramanian committee report first. The first is the recognition of low priority by the center and state. By this, we mean that the report categorically states that the budgets given out by both center and state government do not give enough funds towards the education sector. The report speaks of 6% share of GDP towards education sector, which has not been done by the government. Here you need to be careful about the numbers. If you look at the budget of this year, you might find more money than the previous year. However, as a percentage of GDP, the money allocated towards the education sector for this year is lesser. So, which is a bad trend. This we need to understand, and the report states clearly that if we don't increase the budgetary expenditure towards education, the outcomes will not be satisfactory, or we will not be on an upward trend in terms of growth in the education sector. There is also a report recently which says that the low cost alternatives to improve education will not yield maximum benefits, and they will stop being effective after a period of time. So if we have to improve leaps and bounds, it is only through improved or increased budgetary expenditure. Next, problems in the district information system for education. So basically, the National University for Education Planning and Administration handles all the information of a district, of all the districts in India with respect to education. So any data about education on a district level throughout the country is being handled by NUEPA. The TSR Subramanian Committee report is the first report to talk about the glitches or the issues with respect to data and management of data by the government agencies. All the data about district education or education in a given district across the country is being handled by the NUEPA. This report talks about the problems of such a centralized approach. Next, the role of teachers. A large part of the report has been dedicated towards the role of the teachers in improving the system of the education. However, what we need to understand, or what is important of this, is the fact that the report blasts a myth which is prevalent, that government teachers get paid well, or all the teachers in the government sector are highly paid. The report talks about number of underqualified and underpaid teachers who are hired on a contractual basis, and it also talks about the ill effects that these teachers cause to the quality of education in the country. It also talks about substituting them with well qualified teachers. Next, curtailing the no detention clause till class 5. Up until now, we have this no detention clause, meaning the students can't be failed till class 5. This is a very regressive step at the face of it, but however, the government had brought in before to make sure it serves as a motivation to students. But given the existing scenario and then the world order today, doing away with such a clause will serve in the best interest of the nation. And the report rightly points out to this. And lastly, prescription of standards for schools. The report talks about having standards for all the schools under the RTE so that there is some sort of uniformity and a standardization in terms of both the quality of education and the value of education. Such a standardized approach will bring in a lot more efficiency and effectiveness to the Right to Education Act. Now let's look at the negatives. Let us read the first and the fourth point together. Blaming the teachers for poor learning levels and neglecting the HRD ministry and the state education department's accountability. So, the report does not talk about the issues within the HRD ministry and the state education departments, and it also does not talk about fixing accountability on the officials working in these departments. Instead, it talks about fixing more accountability on teachers, and the blame still continues to be put on the teachers for poor learning levels. However, we need to understand that if there is a problem, the problem is not necessarily from one point, but there are many levels at which the problems are being created. Next, we have seen prescription of standards for schools under the RTE. However, there is also another clause that the report talks about, which is the localization of the standards. The report says that these standards should be localized, which means the regulatory authority will be the district authority again and not the central government. When there is a regulatory authority at every stage, there is a chance of corruption. So when we localize the standards, there is a chance for corruption. Now let's talk about the biggest demerit of the TSR Subramanian Committee report, which is the omission of private sector role in the education. Given the Indian scenario, the role of private sector should grow exponentially for us to see tangible change. However, this report does not talk about the role of private sector in education. Instead, it still puts the responsibility of education in the government, which doesn't seem very possible considering the budget constraints, considering the lack of manpower, and the centralized approach that is being followed. So, to sum up, the report highlights a lot of problems, but it does not give in deep solutions. In other words, the suggestions are more about administrative changes or working around the existing system instead of prescribing institutional reforms. What we need to understand is through generalized pointers instead of specific policy statements, education sector in India cannot be revamped. On those lines, the report does not deliver what it is supposed to deliver or what it was expected to deliver. Thank you, friends. We hope you liked our video. Please like and share our video, and if there are any doubts, please post them on the comment section. Thank you very much.